It looked like the end of something. 70 acres of standing water, pale and still beneath a January sky, like the land itself had given up. What had once been productive farmland in rural Mercer County, Ohio, sat submerged beneath 2 to 3 feet of murky, copper-colored water. Rotting fence posts leaned at broken angles. An old cultivator, orange with rust, was half buried in a muddy berm. Fallen cottonwood trees blocked the drainage ditch, their root balls raised toward the sky like fists that had lost a long fight. The silence was the kind you only find in places abandoned long enough that even the birds have moved on. A county soil assessor who drove by that January later said he'd seen reclaimed swampland with better prospects. And yet, on a cold February morning, a 58-year-old man named Harlan Briggs stood at the edge of that field in rubber boots and a canvas coat, holding a rolled soil map in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. He walked the perimeter. He knelt beside the waterline. He pressed his fingers into the mud. He looked at things nobody else had bothered to look at. Then he made an offer. His neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. The county extension office quietly advised against it. 2 experienced farmers called it, bluntly, financial suicide. The previous owner had walked away after 3 consecutive years of flooding. A government buyout program had rejected the parcel as not worth the administrative cost. But Harlan bought it anyway. And 2 years later, what happened on those 70 acres stopped county officials mid-sentence, brought agricultural researchers to his fence line with clipboards and cameras, and quietly changed the way an entire region thought about what worthless land actually means. If you love stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. These stories travel further than you'd expect, and we'd love to know where you are. Harlan Briggs had spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the Ohio Department of Transportation. He had designed culverts, managed stormwater drainage systems, and spent decades reading how water moves across land, where it pools, where it travels, where it can be redirected. He wasn't a farmer. He had never run cattle, planted row crops, or baled a single roll of hay in his life. What he had was a working knowledge of hydrology that most farmers never acquire, and a retirement that felt emptier than he expected. His wife, Donna, had passed away 18 months before the purchase. Ovarian cancer, 41 days from diagnosis to funeral. The kind of loss that doesn't just take a person, it takes the shape of your days. Harlan spent the following year rattling around their house in Findlay and reading every book on regenerative agriculture he could order online. Donna had grown up on her family's farm in Crawford County. She used to say the best investment her grandfather ever made was in land that everyone else thought was broken. Harlan had been thinking about that for a long time. When he saw the listing, 70 acres, severely flood-affected, priced accordingly, he didn't see a disaster. He saw a drainage problem, and drainage problems were engineering problems. Engineering problems had solutions. He spent 6 weeks before the purchase doing what engineers do, studying. He pulled USDA web soil survey data, reviewed FEMA floodplain maps, and walked the field edges 3 separate times. He contacted a retired NRC's conservation officer named Earl Detmer, who agreed over coffee to look at the parcel with him and confirmed what Harlan had suspected. The soil under there, Earl told him, is Class B silt loam, some of the most productive dirt in the county. It's just been underwater so long people forgot what it could do. The flooding wasn't a mystery to anyone in the county. It was an old story. The property sat at the low end of a natural drainage basin. Decades earlier, a farmer upstream had allowed beaver activity to block the main outlet tile. Over time, the tile system beneath the field, installed in the 1970s, collapsed in 2 critical sections. A county drainage project in the late 1990s had bypassed this parcel entirely. 3 successive wet years between 2019 and 2021 had saturated the soil profile so completely that the land no longer drained, even during dry spells. When Harlan told his neighbor Cleet Ferris, who farmed 400 acres of corn and soybeans nearby, what he was planning, Cleet, was direct. "Harlan, I've watched 3 different families try to make something of that ground. The water wins every time. You're going to spend money and walk away just like the rest of them." The county engineer, a measured man named Dennis Hofstede, was more diplomatic, but said essentially the same thing. "The infrastructure costs alone, new tile, outlet work, equipment access, you'd be looking at serious money before you grow a blade of grass." Harlan listened carefully to every objection. He wrote them all down, and then he used them to build his plan. What Harlan had recognized, what nobody else had bothered to calculate, was that the flooding, paradoxically, was an advantage he could work with. He wasn't planning row crops. He wasn't going to fight the water table. He was going to redesign the land around it. His approach was rooted in a concept gaining traction in agricultural circles: integrated wetland pasture systems. Except that portions of this land would always be wet. Restore those areas as riparian buffer zones, and concentrate drainage improvements on the higher elevation sections where the soil was genuinely recoverable. He hired an excavator operator named Tim Yoakum in April of the first year. Together, they spent 3 weeks installing 1,800 linear feet of new 4-inch drainage tile in the field's upper third, connected to an outlet culvert that Harlan had permitted and engineered himself, saving a significant portion of the contractor cost. They regraded 2 surface swales to direct overflow water toward a central low basin rather than letting it sheet flow across the entire field. The lower 18 acres, the sections that would always hold water seasonally, Harlan designated as a managed wetland. He enrolled in a USDA Wetland Reserve Easement Program, which provided cost-share funding for wetland restoration plantings and generated a modest annual payment for maintaining the area's ecological function. Nobody had thought to do that. By late May, the upper acreage was draining. It wasn't dramatic. Water doesn't celebrate. But Harlan walked that field after 2 inches of rain and watched the surface clear within 36 hours. He stood there for a long time without saying anything. Earl Detmer, who had come to check the outlet structure, noticed that Harlan's expression had changed. "That's the look," Earl said, "of a man who was right." The first crop Harlan put on the recovered ground wasn't corn or soybeans. It was a cover crop blend: crimson clover, tillage radish, and winter rye, seeded in June, on soil that hadn't supported vegetation in years. The purpose wasn't immediate income, it was biology. Compacted, anaerobic soil that has been flooded for years is essentially dead. You don't plant cash crops into dead soil, you feed it first. By August, the field had green on it. Cleet Ferris slowed his truck down twice while driving past. That fall, Harlan no-tilled a grass-legume pasture mix into the recovering ground: orchard grass, tall fescue, red clover. He put up new woven wire fencing along the perimeter and subdivided the usable acreage into 5 rotational grazing paddocks. Then, in the following March, 16 months after buying the property, he introduced 22 cow-calf pairs purchased from a retiring producer 2 counties over. The managed wetlands section, meanwhile, was doing something nobody had expected. Migratory waterfowl had found it by October. A wood duck box program Harlan had installed along the wetland edge, in partnership with the county conservation district, attracted breeding pairs the following spring. A biology teacher from the local high school called asking if students could visit. Harlan said yes. Then the county called. In August of the second year, during one of the worst storm events Mercer County had seen in over a decade, something remarkable happened. A slow-moving system dropped nearly 6 inches of rain in 48 hours. Properties across the region flooded, roads washed, crops drowned in fields that had drained fine for 30 years. Harlan's pastures held. More significantly, his wetland basin, now functioning as a designed water retention system, absorbed runoff from nearly 200 upstream acres and released it slowly through the controlled outlet structure, preventing what the county drainage superintendent later described as a significant surge event that would have hit Cleet Ferris's lower fields. Cleet's corn survived. When Dennis Hofstede, The same county engineer who had discouraged the purchase 2 years earlier submitted his storm drainage report to the county commissioners. He included a section on Harlan's property with a line that got quietly circulated among agricultural professionals in the region. The integrated wetland pasture restoration on this parcel performed as a natural detention basin and likely prevented downstream crop losses estimated in excess of $40,000 during the August event. The Ohio State University Extension Office requested a field day. 41 farmers attended. Cleet Ferris came by on a Thursday evening in September. He leaned on Harlan's fence and looked out at the pasture. Green, grazed evenly, the cattle calm in the late light. The wetland glassed over beyond them. A great blue heron stood at the shallow edge like it owned the place. "I'm not going to say I was wrong," Cleet said. Harlan looked at him. "Okay, but I'm also not going to say I was right." Harlan handed him a coffee from the thermos he still carried everywhere. George Washington Carver once said, "When you can do the common things of life in an uncommon way, you will command the attention of the world." Harlan hadn't set out to command anyone's attention. He'd set out to solve a drainage problem on land that reminded him of something his wife believed, that broken things are rarely as broken as they look. What he built wasn't a miracle. It was 6 weeks of research before he spent $1, a conservation officer who remembered what the soil used to be, an engineer's instinct for where water wants to go, and 2 years of disciplined work. The land that an entire county had written off is now a functioning cattle operation, a wildlife habitat, a storm buffer protecting its neighbors, and an outdoor classroom for students who have never touched soil before. The real lesson isn't about farming. It's about what you see when you look at something everyone else has given up on. Most people saw a flooded field. Harlan saw a drainage problem, a biology problem, and a land management problem. 3 things he knew how to solve. The opportunity was never hidden. It was just waiting for someone willing to look at it long enough to understand it.